Well, I want to welcome you to our program today. We have a very special guest with us. His name is Norin. He is a man who has served for many years on the Platteville Police Force, and he has also been in the position of being the sergeant of the police force. And so at this point, Kevin, I just want to say welcome to the program. Good to have you on today. And one of the things that we're going to be talking about, or the main topic today, is Kevin's shepherding program. And so as we think about church protection and security, Kevin is a person who has got a very good program and has been very helpful to a lot of churches. And so with all of his expertise, it's just good that he's also thinking about the Christian church as far as protection and how we as a congregation can do some very important things as far as making sure that happens. But Kevin, before we begin talking about your shepherding program, I just want to ask a little bit about yourself. Well, one thing I should mention is that one thing that Kevin has done is that he has gotten a lot of the pastors involved, being police chaplains. And the police chaplains do a lot of different things. They do ride-alongs with police officers. They will do death notifications and a number of things, giving spiritual support to some of the officers if they are open to that. And so, but one thing I can say about Kevin is that he has really been a great police officer in Platteville, and being that I've been one of the police chaplains, I've seen him work. And I must say that I go to bed at night knowing that Kevin is one of those police officers or shepherds that are watching over our community, and so I know I can always go to bed at peace at night knowing that we have a good police force watching over us. And so Kevin, I should just say, you've been a police officer for a number of years, and you most recently retired, didn't you?
Right. I retired in August, and I appreciate the kind words. I was actually one of 21 very dedicated, very capable police officers working in the Platteville Police Department. It was my privilege to have trained most of them in one thing or another, and to have been trained by the people who are now running the program. So it's the sort of thing where you don't really ever get it completely out of your system. You're always going to be, scanning the crowds and watching vehicles and things. You don't lose those skills right away, but I'm glad that I'm out now. I'm teaching a little bit at the university and waiting for the snow to melt so I can plant my garden.
Well, that's optimistic, isn't it?
Oh, very.
Those days will be coming. Yeah. And so, and I should mention that the Platteville Police Department is really an awesome police department, and Kevin has had a lot to do with that, as he mentioned, training a lot of the police officers. And so, with all of your years of being a police officer, what are some of the things that you have? What are some of those special points of being a police officer? Some of those, I guess you'd say, well, this is the rewarding side of being a police officer.
Well, one of the better things about being a police officer is that you never know from one day to the next what you're going to be doing. Mm-hmm. You may think today is a good day to catch up on paperwork, and you wind up running from call to call and crisis to crisis. Mm-hmm. I've always liked being one of the good guys. Going back to when I was small, living next door to a Dane County deputy who was one of my early heroes. Mm-hmm. And you're that person who shows up when people are at the end of their rope. They pick up that 911 line and call us, and I like being the person who shows up and makes it better. Sometimes with varying success, but I like to be that person who shows up and helps.
Yeah, and that you have so many times. And some of these times are such critical times, and I'll tell you, to have a person like you showing up and taking care of the situation, I'll tell you, it's really a big help to so many of us in those situations. And so, as far as, you're getting, pastors involved, being police chaplains, and obviously you're a person of faith. How have you been a Christian all of your life, or what's been kind of your faith journey, or how long have you been a Christian?
I was raised going to church, sometimes being dragged to church with various amounts of enthusiasm, depending on where I was in my life. As happens so often, by the time I was in high school going to college, I tended to leave that part of my life behind. But one of the things that came from being a police officer is that you can't really do that job and be ambiguous about the existence of good and evil.
Oh, sure.
You're going to run into things that are, stupid decisions based upon alcohol consumption, and then once in a while you bump into real evil. And you look at it, and it looks at you, and you know that's not a matter of opinion. That is a bad thing, no matter who you are. And that kind of began to draw me back towards something. I used to tell people I was a working agnostic. I didn't know, but I wanted to know. I wanted to find out. And, as has happened in so many key points in my life, I became a Christian in my squad car, driving around when I realized that, that I could accept Christ because he had already accepted me. And that was a huge weight off my shoulders and gave me the ability to be that much better at my job. Because now I'm not only working for the city, I'm working for a higher cause.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so you really did, see your position as sergeant of the police force as really being a calling from God, didn't you?
Well,
yeah, you shared that with me before.
I'm one of those fortunate Christians with a desire to serve who was sent where he was needed through a little speaker on my console, where the dispatcher would say, well, this is where they need you right now, and this is where you need to go today. And there was often a prayer for patience and for skill and for protection, and that's how I started my shifts. Not only for myself, but for the outstanding young officers that I've left since I retired.
Yeah, so now one of the things that you have developed is a shepherding program that can be implemented in congregations.
Sure.
And so what kind of started all of that? As far as we're living in a day and age where we want places to be secure, whether it be malls, movie theaters, or schools, but also our churches.
Yeah.
But so how did all of this start? What was kind of the rudiment of your wanting to get a shepherding program started?
Going back, I didn't finish doing the type of job that I thought I would be doing when I started back in 1995. My first career was as a public school teacher, and then I became the oldest rookie at Platteville at the age of 35. But I remember sitting in my living room with a guy who's now the chief of police at Platteville and the lieutenant, and watching Columbine unfold live on CNN. And Doug McKinley, the chief, now looked at me and said, this is going to be a game changer. This is going to change the way we do business. And he was right. And from the Columbine event, it changed the way we respond to those types of things and resulted in a lot of training at first from other agencies who knew how to do active shooter response. Every police officer watching this knows what to do now because of the training that started as a result of Columbine in the event of an active shooter. But we went from training police officers, and frankly it took a couple of key retirements in the industry before this idea of police officers going in after the bad guy instead of setting up and waiting for the tactical team was widely accepted. But it went from there to going into the schools, and wherever we were allowed, and there still is a certain amount of resistance there, but going in and saying, okay, teachers, here's how you keep your kids safe. These are the things you look for. This is what you do when the bad things happen. This is how you protect your kids. And from there, I've gone on to talking to college classes, speak to, on the average of a couple of hundred college students a year on how to survive in a classroom. They all know where to go where there's a fire. They all know where to go there's a tornado. What do you do when an active shooter, when a bad guy comes into your building with murder in their heart? And I've gotten good response from that, although you're bumping up against a lot of denial. It'll never happen here. Why are you talking about this? Well, there was an uptick one year in church-related violence where people were coming in and they start shooting. Or more realistically, in places where I go to church, you're going to have an estranged spouse coming in. They're going to take the kids now. Or you're going to have somebody who wants to pick a fight with the pastor. Anything up to and including an active shooter scenario, which happens around the country. And I started to think, why don't we take that training and experience that we have in preparing for school-related violence and transfer that to the church? And it caught on with just the right people, the logical people to be your sheepdogs. I look at the shepherds as being the guy in the front of the room, you, for instance, during your church services. And then you have your sheep, your flock, and it's not a derogatory term, but it's the people who are there pretty much to receive what is given to them. They may go on to become leaders, or they may go on to become ushers, and out of that usher pool is the potential for sheepdogs. Starting with something as simple as when everybody else's head is bowed in prayer, their heads are up and they're scanning the crowd, or they're watching the door.
Okay, so a sheepdog, that's a term that you use
Yep.
for people who are designated to, well, be ushers, but then, keep going
all
on.
right.
You know, as far
Let's say we have a group of ushers, and there are always going to be ushers who are going to be perfectly content to do the head count and collect the offerings. That's okay. There's a need for that. But there's a type of man who longs to do more, who longs to be that biblical protector, leader, nurturer of the family, and by extension, of the church. You look for a man who wants to put in a little extra time, show up 15, 20 minutes ahead of everybody else and watch the crowd coming in. Someone who's willing to get up during the service and take a walk around the church. Someone who knows CPR. Everybody ought to know CPR, but the sheepdogs, the people designated to keep people safe, should know if there's a medical emergency, what do I do? And the whole message is low key. You should not be able to walk into my church or any other church where there's this sort of a program going and say, there's one, there's one, there's one, and say, those are the sheepdogs. The people that are doing security in my church, they're the ones that are shaking hands, smiling and talking and schmoozing out in the entryway the way everybody does before we start the church service. But while they're doing that, while they're shaking your hand and talking to you, they're also scanning, and they're watching the crowd. Who's coming in looking like they're coming in for the first time, might need some help finding a seat, or just to be greeted. Nothing worse than coming into a church for the first time and feeling invisible because nobody's willing to talk to you.
Oh, yeah.
Who looks like, they may be troubled, may have some issues, or they're trying to focus in on somebody. And we're not talking being confrontational, we're simply saying being aware of what's there. And then when the bad things happen, that's the only time the sheepdog's teeth become visible other than smiling. And, anywhere from, we have a men's discipleship group that was a great pool for drawing these sheepdogs out. They want to develop that biblical warrior mindset of protecting the flock. And not everybody is comfortable with that. Not everybody should be. We all have different gifts. I don't want the little old lady whose gift is making bread for the church to be a sheepdog necessarily, unless that's where her heart leads her. On the other hand, somebody whose heart leads them to be the protector should be encouraged to do that. So that's kind of where it got started, and it's still very much a work in progress. But I have some very good people that are involved in working with me. I help them, I think, more than they help me, or the other way around. They help me a lot in terms of making sure that what I do is Bible-based, and making sure that I don't begin to stray away from what God wants towards what I think. There's a lot of prayer, there's a lot of listening to what the Bible and what God feels the man should do as a Christian man.
Yeah, so as you look at sheepdogs or potential sheepdogs, are you looking for people who are coming forward saying, I'd like to learn this? Or, is there a certain training that you do with them?
Right. We like them to be a known quantity. All right. Are they involved in the church in other ways? Are they coming to discipleship groups? Are they coming to Bible study groups? Do they have a firm background? And they can be newer Christians, like I consider myself to be. But we want to make sure that they are there for the right reasons. And as far as the training, the observation, even a little bit of self-defense, we can do that as long as their heart is in the right place. But we want to have that heart there so we're not training somebody who's going to go off on their own and we have to do damage control later because they did what they wanted to do and not what God wants us to do.
Yeah, well, I can just see if you have the wrong person and they're doing the wrong thing and all of a sudden going up to somebody and almost in a harassment kind of a way, I can see where that could create a lot of damage. And
they're the kind of people that the detractors of the sheepdog program are going to focus on and say, there, you see what's wrong with that? And then we have to do damage control. In my profession, we do that all the time. Tens of thousands of police officers go to work every day, do everything from the routine to the heroic, But that doesn't make the news. What makes the news is the one officer who lost his temper, or the one officer who did something that wasn't appropriate. And nowadays, everything you do is on YouTube. So we need to make sure that we protect the program by making sure that we have the right people there. I don't know that there were that many cases where we've had to go to somebody and say, look, you're not ready yet. This is what you need to work on. But I think the potential is there for men who have stopped coming to church because they don't feel there's a place for them. What am I supposed to do? How many church hymns are written in a key that's high for a man to sing? Just something as little as that. It's a matter of making sure that they're coming in and say, yes, I do have a place here. I can worship God through the gifts that I've been given. And, this is my family. These are the sheep. These are the flock that I'm here to protect. I don't run the flock. That's the shepherd's job. All right. I serve the shepherd, which would be the pastor, and on a higher level, God. But I serve the sheep on behalf of the shepherd.
Okay. Yeah, so you got a sheepdog who is welcoming people and noticing somebody new to welcome. Because, like you say, our church should be doing this just, to show hospitality, saying as God has welcomed us into His presence, that we need to be welcoming one another into God's presence, and to say that we want you to be part of us, whether it just be for this worship service, or if you want to make this your church home, whatever. We're here to serve you.
Absolutely.
But then they're also looking for problems. But let's say that a problem does arise. Let's say you get somebody who, in the middle of the worship service, all of a sudden starts acting out. What does a sheepdog do at that point?
Okay, that's a good point. The thing to remember in any kind of a potentially violent situation, whether it's in a school or an office building or a church, is that, nowadays everybody has a cell phone, right? So 911 gets called. A 3 to 5 minute response time for the police officers to arrive and deal with the problem would be outstanding. Usually it's quite a bit more. In most active shooter cases, the shooting is done by the time the police show up, or it ends when they hear the sirens coming. The question is, what are you going to do during those 3 to 5, or more realistically, 5 to 10 minutes it takes for the officers to show up and deal with the problem? You're on your own during that time, and by you I mean everybody who's not a police officer. So we have different strategies for like the Sunday school classes. Can we secure the doors? Do we have single point of entry? That's one of the things that we've taken from the schools. During the church service, we have all the doors open, but I went to a church last week where there was a single point of entry. I tried to get in through some of the other doors, and I couldn't get in. I had to walk around the building to get in. I thought, somebody's got it. Somebody's figured out that we need to control who comes in where so we can watch. In my church, it's possible to go through a back door, the big glass doors in the lower parking lot, and you're right in the hallway where all the children are having Sunday school. How do we deal with that? And it's something that we're still working on there. But you want to make sure that you are keeping as many people safe as possible. If it's a fire, you want to make sure the old people make it out the exit, right? If it's a violent situation, you want to make sure that there are people who are trained to deal with that violence placed between the source of the violence and the people that are leaving and getting out. And you want to do it in a calm way. And like I say, until that moment happens, the average person walking into the church should not be able to pick out who those sheepdogs are, because they're busy schmoozing and hanging out with their families and doing everything else that they do. One of the resources that I think churches need to focus on is, very common for police officers to be believers and attending church. We have we have concealed carry here in Wisconsin, but as a police officer, having had training to deal with things like that, like every cop working out there now knows what to do in an active shooter situation as a patrol officer. If you approach these people and say, hey, look, would you mind, when you come to church on Sundays, you're a regular attender, would you mind coming armed? We're not hiring you as security, but as long as they can legally go just about anywhere armed and they're trained, why would you disarm them at the door, the people who are most likely to be able to help you? That's a great resource. School secretary and the school custodian, same, they have their counterparts in the churches. Custodian's going to know when a door has been tampered with. school secretary is going to, or the church secretary is going to know, say if you're using your church for a shelter for the homeless. You know, when we're pulling doors as police officers in the middle of the night and there's a door open and we hear somebody moving around, that makes us a little nervous. We need to know stuff like that when those things are going on. But communication and using what resources you have, I'm not talking about spending a lot of money on a video camera system. Videos are good for analyzing the crime after it's happened. I would more have people who are aware and see what's in front of them and communicate that. I don't know that anybody's ever died of embarrassment. But when the church custodian is pushing floors and he noticed 2 cars that are not obviously police cars circling around and around the church or sitting there, and they look like they may be scoping out the building, what's it cost to make a phone call? Says, hey, could you bring a squad car through? This is what I'm seeing. Or we have a guy here who is getting more and more agitated during our church service. Our ushers are talking to him right now, but we'd feel more comfortable if a police officer would come by. See, then you've got that time cushion. Then you're not trying to stay alive for 5 to 10 minutes. You're already getting the police on board with what's happening. To answer your question, what do you do when the bad things happen? I want to make sure that when we train our sheepdogs, they don't come in with the idea that we're training a commando team. It's stuff that any guy, any believer who understands the Bible-based idea of righteous violence in defense of home and family is capable of doing. All they need is the mindset, and we can teach them the technical stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so a sheepdog is not one who is necessarily going to be carrying a weapon.
No.
Okay, no. Unless, of course, they are authorized to do so as a police officer or whatever it may be.
Well, in Wisconsin with concealed carry, we don't have a no guns allowed sticker on our church door. We talked about that when concealed carry first came out, and it was the bad guys are not going to obey that sticker anyway. Why would we disarm any good guys who choose? There are probably at any given time several people who have chosen to carry concealed as they attend church, whom we may or may not even know about. But if you have trained people as a part of your team, that's going to make any kind of response quicker and quieter and more organized than a bunch of people jumping up and going into war mode. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot to be said for having some idea of who's your guy. We do something from police work. We do contact and cover with our sheepdogs. We have one typically is assigned to the sanctuary, watching the crowd as the church service is going on. We have another person who roams through the church. They'll come in and sit down. They'll make contact with the person who's watching the sanctuary, and the other one goes on. And then we have 1 or 2 floaters. If we see that one of our ushers is talking to somebody and they get that feeling, or they make eye contact with that usher, this is making me uncomfortable, they come up and they just stand nearby. They don't crowd them, mm-hmm. But they go, hey, how can I help? And that's usually our first approaching contact. Sir, how can I help you? What can I do to help you? And, if they're actually looking for help, they're going to tell you. And if they're not looking for help, they're going to tell you in another way. But, low-key communication and organization is going to be what keeps your church safe. Not only when services is going on. I know there are a lot of things going on at your church, and at my church during the course of the week. I think just about every night somebody's meeting there for something. And during the daytime, there's a lot of stuff going on. What do we do during that time? Can you walk into a church? We had a local church where the doors were always unlocked. And we'd be checking doors in the middle of the night, and yep, this church is open again. And we'd call the clergy person, and they'd start to get a little annoyed. Well, yeah, it's a church. We want everybody to come in. Not necessarily. Mm-hmm. We managed to dialogue through there, and security got a little better. But yeah, when you live in a college town and there's that migration of people from the bar district to student housing, and the church is along that migration route, you don't necessarily want everybody walking in there.
Right. Yeah, so you're talking about traffic flow, mm-hmm. having the sheepdogs, and then also understanding that the police force is there. That don't be afraid to call them if you're looking at a situation yep. coming up.
When I was working, I bet I said 2 or 3 times a week to a member of the public, we would rather be called discover it was nothing and leave again than not be called and wish we had been. And that's, you know, we kind of shake our, oh, so-and-so's calling again. But we would rather that happen than discover if we'd only been there, if they'd only called us 5 minutes sooner.
Yeah, and a church is it's a vulnerable place because it's a trusting place. You know, people come to church and there's this trusting feeling that everybody that's coming here is Christian and kind and working in the best interest of God and of each other. So it is one of those places where it can really catch you off guard if you're not being somewhat watchful and somewhat prepared for all of this.
And not everybody has to be in that mode. Just a few. But
just a few.
A good friend of mine at church shared this with me. You know, do we look at a church as a museum for saints or a hospital for sinners? You know, you're going to have broken people coming in. You're going to have people, God knows we're going to have a lot of imperfect people coming in. That's part of the reason some of us go there, because, you know, we are imperfect. We want that fellowship. We shouldn't be too surprised when people bring baggage with them. You know, I think everybody brings baggage with them to some degree.
Sure. And Kevin, you are willing to, let's say there's somebody watching today, and they are saying, you know, we'd like to have you come to our church and maybe give us a little instruction with all of this. Are you willing to do that?
I would be happy to do that. Typically, the presentation goes an hour and a half or so where I say everything I need to say. If we go shorter than that, like the presentation I did for a homeschooling group last week, I needed enough time to help them make an informed decision on whether or not they wanted to learn more. But my email address is available, and
we'll get that up on the screen.
Shoot me a note, and if I can help you, I'll say so. If I can't help you, I'll tell you that too.
Yeah. Well, Kevin, I must say that this has been very interesting. You know, to learn more about, you know, security. What are some simple, practical things that churches can do to make their churches a safer place?
Oh yeah.
And here again, if you want to have Kevin come to your church, he's willing to do that, and we've got the information up on the screen. And so, Kevin, I just want to thank you for being our guest today.
Yeah.
This has been very interesting and very insightful, and you're certainly a blessing to us.
I appreciate that, and I also want to point out, Pastor Pedersen is one of our police chaplains, and we appreciate the spiritual support he gives us through prayer and also being available when we need someone to come in and help us.
Very good. And I want to thank all of you for joining us this day as well.